Here is Marx's famous saying, philosophers have only interpreted the world, interpreted it. But he says, what matters is not to interpret the world, but to change it. So I say Marx is pointing to the Prophet. A mother takes her child to the park. She sits on a bench. She lets her child play freely in the park. A 5-year-old child, she says, go play, son, but keeps an eye on him. Why? This instinct to protect, this watching, actually involves a kind of supervision. What is involved in supervision? A surveillance society is a society of compassion. How do we perceive God's supervision or watchfulness over us, His vigilance? Is this supervision like a principal constantly watching all the high school students to see if they're smoking or not, with a got you mentality, or is it with the mentality I'm about to describe?
Hello, surveillance and supervision. Socially, hello to everyone from Istanbul School. Dear viewers, today we will be discussing the concepts of surveillance and supervision from a social perspective. We will address the transition from a surveillance society to a monitoring society. Our guest is Professor Dr. Şaban Ali Düzgün. Hello, Professor.
Hello.
Professor, today we have two important concepts. We're talking about surveillance and monitoring. We want to address these two concepts together. In fact, we live in a digital society and are constantly under surveillance. We could also say that we are in an age of transparency. On the other hand, monitoring offers us a different perspective. How do you evaluate these two concepts? How do you approach them in the context of religion, in the context of the Quran?
Of course, now there is a process of transparency that everyone participates in voluntarily. That is, the identity information of you, me, and our friends behind the camera, all of it, is recorded somewhere other than just on our ID cards. It's the same with our bank information. And when we shop, that information first goes to the main center that issues the card we all know. After that, the money is withdrawn and enters circulation. First, there is a record. There are records everywhere. This is what a digital society means. In other words, we are now just numbers. Each of us is a digit. When someone calls out the person with this ID number, we stand up. So much so that today's thinkers call this a digital society or a digital herd. The digital herd as we know it, it's sad. I mean, it's sad to become just a number. This is also a part of the claim of a liberal, or rather a neoliberal society, transparency. But the more transparent you are, the more you open yourself up to the outside, the more your privacy slips away from your hands. The equivalent of the word privacy in Turkish is dignity. The words mahrum, deprived, and mahrum, private, intimate. In fact, the word ihram, as in entering ihram, the sacred state for pilgrimage, comes from the same root. The moment you enter ihram, everything outside of you also becomes sacred. Because once you enter ihram, there are many things you used to do that you can no longer do. When you enter ihram, you also deprive yourself of many things. Therefore, privation's dignitary, regardless of the type of society, whether you call it a digital society, a medieval feudal society, a pre-modern society, or a modern society, whatever you call it, the most fundamental concept is the protection of a person's dignity. That is their privacy. That's the first point. So what did we say? There is such a thing as surveillance. The mobs cameras are watching you. Everything you enter into your internet accounts, everything you type into search engines, all of it becomes big data. All that information is transferred as data into the system we call big data. That data is then processed. And without you having any idea, then put it this way. A father unexpectedly finds out that his daughter is pregnant from the digital ads that are sent to him by the supermarket. This happens because by carefully analyzing the purchases made with a store loyalty card, they are able to calculate and determine exactly what the girl has bought. For example, let's say the person making these purchases has checked the prices of baby diapers or has bought pregnancy tests. The father gets notified like, your daughter is pregnant, and so on. Now, the digital world is also built on control. So what are we saying? A world where people make their own decisions, where their privacy is protected, where their thoughts and ideas, right? Now, with this much transparency, this much openness, what did Chulhan call this? He calls it the digital herd. Now, in the society people have reached, there is a surveillance mechanism. And I will mention two names here that we all know in relation to this surveillance mechanism. One of them is a truly great scholar and thinker raised by the Ottoman Empire, who also kept all the financial records of the Ottoman treasury in his time, the person in the Divan Khatib Shalabi. He has a work called Sihanuma. Sihanuma means an optic that sees the whole world. You are able to see the entire world. Nearly 2 centuries after him, the Englishman Jeremy Bentham created the word panopticon, which is essentially the English equivalent of chihanuma. Panopticon, a surveillance mechanism that observes prisoners in the prison 24 hours a day, without their knowledge, without them being aware of anything, and misses no detail. Why do we surveil? To establish control. Why do we surveil? To exercise power over them. So, what does surveillance bring? Surveillance brings control. Surveillance is the way for the observer to establish power over the society being observed. This is called a kind of infocracy. That is, info means information data. Infocracy means to create or administer a culture. Infocracy is a society governed by information. The more information you have, the more data you possess, the more you can control those who own that data, supervise them, and establish power over them. I bring this to your attention so that we can take a snapshot of the society we live in and carefully see what kind of society we have become a part of.
A form of domination is established with all the information collected.
A form of domination is established. This is where the concept of psychopolitics comes into play. In other words, processes that will influence your political decisions are at work here. Psychopolitics. I collect and compile your data, and then I put you through processes that will influence your psychology so that in the next election you will vote for the party I want among the potential participating political parties. Psychopolitics. Now, we have become so open to external control that when Gustave Le Bon wrote about the psychology of crowds, we hadn't even entered the digital world yet. But right now we are experiencing the most dominant of the processes that influence the psychology of crowds, the very processes he foresaw. And that is how, in this digital world, we have been turned into objects that are controlled and surveyed. So why am I making this complaint? One of the names of God is Raqib. Is the opponent the observer or the observed? In fact, the word muraqaba comes from that. There is surveillance involved there. He sees you too. He watches you as well.
Actually, it seems like both are intertwined. On one hand, he is observing.
It can be looked at this way. I mean, using an example we all know. A mother takes her child to the park. She sits on a bench. She lets her child play freely in the park. A 5-year-old child. She says, go play, son, but keeps an eye on him. Why? Because this act of watching, this surveillance, actually involves a sense of protection. What is present in surveillance? A surveillance society is a society of compassion. In surveillance, in watching over, there is compassion, there is empathy, there is protection. In surveillance, there is disciplining, bringing into line, and establishing power over someone. If we separate these two words, would religion have a place in society if it is based on surveillance or if it is based on watching over? Let's contrast these two words, because I wish for the word watching over to be emphasized and brought to the forefront. Let's take a snapshot of the society we live in. Then let's reflect on how we can turn the negativity and the processes working against us in this picture into something good for everyone. That's where I stand.
Another perception also comes to my mind, Professor. You mentioned a mother watching over her child, and I'll continue with that example. It also seems important how the child feels in that situation, because is the mother watching over the child in a protective, compassionate, and merciful way, or is she exerting pressure on them? Is she establishing dominance to discipline the child? If the child feels that way, it can actually be seen as an interference with their freedom.
Very good. It's the same with people's or the audience's relationship with religion and the Quran. How do we, like children, perceive God's watching over us or his surveillance? Let's give a more extreme example. Is this surveillance like that of a manager? A principal constantly watching all the high school students to see whether they are smoking or not? Is it with the mentality of, I caught you? In other words, is it with the mentality of, if you commit a crime, I'll catch you immediately? Or is it with the mentality, I'm about to explain? The Quran refers to itself as light. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. He is described as the light, the illuminator, the radiance of the heavens and the earth. The Prophet is also described as light. The message that comes is also described as light. Why? Light? What does light do? What does illumination do?
It illuminates, it leads.
It illuminates, it guides the way. But there's more to it. If we look at it from the perspective of social history, I put it this way. There are bodies in society that exist but are invisible. Where are they? They're at the very bottom of society and no one is aware of them. They're just scraping by. Miserable.
Disadvantaged groups.
Disadvantaged groups. No one sees them and no one wants to see them. They only become visible when you shine a light on them. You shine a light on them and you tell people, look at this, see this. That is enlightenment. So it's not just about illuminating, but all think of it this way. When the sun rises, you start to see many things that were previously invisible. Whether you like it or not, the Quran is this real. It is light. Whether you like it or not, it will show you everything that exists in society. And a true human being should turn something unpleasant there into a process that becomes pleasant. Another example. The Quran says to the Prophet, you are an ear for goodness. The polytheists say to the Prophet, he's just an ear. An ear, so what does an ear do?
It hears everything.
It hears everything. Look, the Quran says to him, you are an ear for goodness. To hear what is good, to hear the voices of those who cannot make themselves heard, and to act accordingly. Now, look, is this a kind of, is this surveillance or observation? This is indeed observation, surveillance. In other words, to lend a helping hand to those in need. In these programs, we have emphasized that disadvantaged groups are not the problem areas of society, but on the contrary, that we should strive to build a social structure that includes them in prosperity. And this is the mission of the Prophet and the divine message. I always say this. The Prophet is not part of the history of kings. The history of kings follows a different path. The history of philosophers follows a different path. The history of prophets follows yet another path. Kings are concerned with questions like, how do I rule? How do I maintain my power? How do I grow, expand my territory, and establish control? That is the way of kings. A prophet is not a king. Supervision and control are not the Prophet's business. That's why the Quran reminds us, the matter is against me. You are never to establish domination, control, or authority over people, or to rule over them. That is not your job. It says, you are not a king. You are not a king. It doesn't say so literally, but all the acts and deeds that a king does, it says that's not your job. So we understand that, or we've come to that point. I'm saying he's not a philosopher either. A philosopher only knows, does mental exercises, thinks. But the Prophet's job is to put what he thinks that is, his thoughts into action and to change the world. This is just like Marx's famous saying, philosophers have only interpreted the world, interpreted it. But he says what was needed was not to interpret the world, but to change it. So I'm saying that Marx is actually pointing to the prophets.
It actually has a practical counterpart.
And to change the world, you will see, if what you see needs a helping hand, you will offer your hand. You will make it a part of life, an active foundational part. Otherwise, it's just, oh, there's someone in need over there, let's check on them from time to time. That's not how it is. You will make it a foundational element. In other words, imagine a world where not a single person with a disability is left out of active participation in life. Our friends with autism will also participate. Our friends with Down syndrome will also participate. One of our dear students did their doctoral thesis on this. It was about people with Down syndrome. I asked, why did you choose this topic for your doctoral thesis? She said, Professor, my brother has Down syndrome, that's why. And as part of a study, she gathered children with Down syndrome in Ankara. I'm sure she will listen to this video. And she took them to Haki Bayram Veli Mosque for a prayer. The children with Down syndrome. She says, Professor, I can't even describe to you how happy the children were. I can't tell you what I experienced there that day, he says, because most of them are kept at home. They can't even go out. Now, what did we say? First, they will benefit from all the opportunities and possibilities of life. And if possible, we will assign them roles in the areas where life is built. Between the 3rd and 9th of November, during Organ Donation Week, I attended a program. After the program, the friends who organized it said, Professor, on the floor below, there is a concert by children with cerebral palsy. They come every week and do music practice. I went down there. Those children were playing and singing there together with their family. There was an incredible turnout. It's wonderful. These disadvantaged groups are all of our children, all of our siblings, socially speaking. The more we make them a part of the mechanisms that watch over, and protect them. Secondly, if we involve them in the processes of building and creating, there are nearly 7 to 8 million people with disabilities or from disadvantaged groups in Turkey. That's not a small number. Therefore, a society that looks out for all its segments in this way, when it upholds privacy, dignity, mutual empathy, and operates processes of coexistence and making life possible, together raises that sense of dignity to the highest level. My point, what I'm trying to say here, is that we are truly very transparent. All our data, all our information is open to everyone. I hope that we can minimize as much as possible the control and power that this openness could establish over us, and instead strive to raise awareness about the protective and watchful mechanisms of religion in this area.
That really is a very important awareness, Professor. It's not just individuals with disabilities. We also see that many different groups in society are disadvantaged and perceived as lower class. In fact, religion here tries to establish equality and a just order. And I think that with this awareness, it will help us overcome these issues a bit more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we chose this title to draw attention to this awareness. I hope we have achieved the goal we aimed for.
I hope so too, Professor. Thank you very much. Thank you for your valuable comments.
Thank you.
Dear viewers, today we talked about the surveillance and monitoring society. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.